Moral subjectivism is the idea that moral issues and morality have to do with personal taste, and they change on a person-to-person basis. The negative argument in the novel basically just talks about how just because there is not an empirical answer or an answer that can be measured or physically proven doesn't mean that there isn't a correct answer. Basically saying that just because you can't measure an ethical issue doesn't mean that there is still not a right or wrong answer. The example that is used in this argument is the two scientists who disagree on the existence of other life forms in the universe. Just because one scientist says that there is life forms and one scientist says that there isn't, doesn't mean that it's a subjective answer. Just because there's moral disagreement, this doesn't imply moral subjectivism. The positive argument in the book basically says that and claims that there's only one argument that's needed, and that is to believe anything else is just ridiculous. There's ridiculous consequences of believing that moral subjectivism has anything to do with ethical questions. This is because if you're a moral subjectivist, that means that virtually any action is morally permissible for any person. The example that's used here is that if Johnny's moral beliefs are simply that he likes to torture, or that it's morally permissible to torture babies for fun, if you're a moral subjectivist, that means that you cannot refute these. That is his subjective opinion, and if ethics are morally subjective, that means that they are on a person-to-person basis. The book does a good job of arguing both sides, because it allows you to see how flawed subjectivism is. The negative argument that makes sense, because it talks about just because there isn't a definitive answer doesn't mean that it's subjective. So just because you can't prove that there's extra or there's other life in the universe doesn't mean that it's a personal opinion. Just because the one scientist believes that there is life forms doesn't mean that there is. And just because the one scientist believes that there isn't doesn't mean that there isn't. There either is or isn't, no matter what their subjective opinions are. The positive argument it does a great job at showing how flawed it is, because it just makes sense. It doesn't make sense for someone to believe just because Johnny thinks it's okay to torture babies or think it's morally okay doesn't make it moral. There is a right or wrong answer, and that I think the positive argument does a really good job at showing that.